Yeah, so gosh, everybody, thank you so much for coming here. Um, so, and as you probably have already figured out, and as Tomasz was saying, the whole purpose of this, as the title of this symposium would suggest, this is the inaugural event of the Forest Invasion Synthesis Center, which is this new project that we're just starting out, and we're hoping that you can all be part of it. And I'm going to be talking about a little bit, just very briefly, about the problem of biological invasions in forests. I'm going to say a little bit about what a synthesis center is, and then I'm going to sort of say, well, what's the plan from here of how we're implementing the synthesis center concept here at the university and in the synthesis center. And it's also like Tomasz was mentioning, really the whole purpose of this symposium is to try to generate discussion and to kind of brainstorm ideas for working groups. Because as I'll be talking about a little before, the idea of the synthesis center concept is that the center is a place where people come and they collaborate. And if they're going to collaborate, the whole point of it is you have problems that you're working on together. And so in inviting the speakers here and everybody else, the hope was that we can get perspectives from people from different parts of the world, the people that work on different aspects of the problem, whether the natural sciences, social sciences, plants, insects, pathogens, and basically brainstorm ideas for synthetic research. So anyway, okay, I can drive here with this thing, can I? Am I doing something wrong here? Oh, let's see. Or maybe I need to go the other direction. Ah, there we
Right.
go. So, and of course, this is probably a slide that many people have seen before. I know some people have seen this before, but basically, just the point I want to make is that the problem of biological invasions in forests is a problem that just keeps getting bigger and bigger because ever since the sort of mid 1800s, we've had this sort of steady accumulation of in this case, forest insects in different parts of the world, but also forest pathogens. And similarly, we see similar patterns with plants. This is a graph of numbers of I think area of invasions by exotic wilding pines. And this is I'm not going to say a lot about the issue of in that non-native trees are increasingly grown in forest plantations around the world because of to meet the world's needs for wood and fiber, and which I think is an interesting aspect because the reasons why non-native trees grow so fast is in some ways it's sort of the yin and yang of the sort of tree invasion problem that the trees also can be non-native trees can be very highly competitive and displace natural vegetation. So it's one of these kind of interesting problems where there are both benefits and costs of these kind of activities. And so it's not just invasive trees, but also herbaceous plants all over the world. We're seeing more invasions by herbaceous plants in forests. And of course, the impacts of these plant invasions can be quite complex. That a lot of the sort of characteristic of plant invasions is a sort of pattern of homogenization of plant communities, and that homogenization can have quite complex impacts in terms of changes in wildlife habitat use, things like soil microbial communities. So just putting this up here to show that the impacts of these invasions can be quite complicated. And of course, with forest insect and disease invasions, the impacts are also can be quite complicated. Probably the biggest, or probably the aspect that kind of attracts the most attention is you can get very large amounts of tree mortality associated with non-native pathogens and insects in many that's happened in many different parts of the world. And that tree mortality can translate into a host of other cascading issues such as impacts on carbon cycles, where you have live tree biomass converted to dead tree biomass. Some of that's released into the atmosphere, affecting atmospheric carbon. And then the impacts of these invasions can be much more nuanced. And so a good example I'll show here is of one of the impacts of the invasion of North America by the emerald ash borer, which is having a huge impact on black ash, which is used by many Native American indigenous people in their basket making. And so by eliminating this tree, you're essentially eliminating this indigenous culture. So the cultural impacts of these invasions can be quite complex. And then I just want to mention, another part of the scope of this problem is how to manage the problem. And the word biosecurity is used to describe the activities that countries and international organizations use to basically prevent invasions. And this is done, again, it's a slightly complicated problem because some of those activities happen before trying to prevent species from arriving in the first place. There are activities that are done at the border to attempt things like inspection and phytosanitary treatments that are applied to prevent species from entering new parts of the world. And then after species arrive, efforts are made to use surveillance to find populations and to eradicate them. And balancing, there are a lot of really interesting problems about, how best to tackle this problem. Are you better off putting all your effort into things like inspection, or are you better off to let things establish and try to find them and eradicate them? So that's really basically 7 slides, I think, start describing the whole problem of biological invasions. And this really sets the stage for what we plan to do with the center here. And this sort of describes our plan, at least at this point. And like everything, I'd love to have any kind of input you have and suggestions. That we see that the scope of this Forest Invasion Synthesis Center is to focusing on plant invasions, insect invasions, and plant pathogen invasions in forests. But then there are a lot of sort of related ancillary topics. And so some of these are more on the sort of natural science side of things. It's kind of like biogeography and macroecology, but there are many other aspects that are much more on the social science part of the problem, because we know that there are really important factors that play important roles both in causing invasions, driving them, things like trade and other activities where these organisms are accidentally being introduced, but also better understanding the impacts of invasions. We really have only a partial understanding of how these invasions are affecting the way that forests are valued. Anyway, so I think that it's a really interesting multidisciplinary problem. And hopefully in the Synthesis Center, we're hoping to capture all these kind of different disciplines. And now I wanted to move on to sort of what the Synthesis Center concept is. And the idea of ecological synthesis, it basically is this idea of doing scientific research, in this case, answering ecological problems, by tapping into existing information. And that information can be just simply theory, or it could be models. Very often it's data, and very often this ecological synthesis may focus on tapping into big data sets and using those data in ways that maybe they haven't been used before. And so a lot of different problems, sort of like macroecological problems, can be addressed with these kind of big data approaches. But similarly, a lot of these socioeconomic problems can be addressed as well. And so this idea of ecological synthesis, again, a lot of it focuses on sort of the big data and incorporating a lot of analytical techniques such as modeling and economic analysis. Another part of ecological synthesis is also integrating stakeholders into research. The idea is that very often stakeholders actually have unique insight into a lot of the problems that we're trying to solve. And so it's very useful very often to incorporate them or invite them to be part of analyses. And of course, there's also a need to involve stakeholders to help provide answers to the applied ecological problems. And this whole idea of ecological synthesis really goes back to with maybe the first Ecology Synthesis Center, which was founded at the University of California in Santa Barbara in 1995. And this is where I personally was exposed to this concept. I just found out about it, and I ended up spending 3 summers there, and I participated, organized many working groups at at NCs, as it's called, and it's where this idea developed. And the synthesis center concept has been replicated all over the world, and maybe some of you have participated in working groups and other events at some of these other ecology synthesis centers around the world. And the idea that NCs introduced in applying the synthesis, ecological synthesis, is this idea that there really are almost no permanent scientific staff. The idea is that there are scientists around the world that have the potential to do this synthetic research, but they generally don't have opportunities to talk to each other. And so basically the idea with this synthesis center concept is you don't have any permanent staff other than just the administrative staff, and that the only people there that are sort of quasi-permanent are postdocs. And of course, postdocs tend to come and go every few years. But the real sort of focus of the activity are these working groups. And the idea with these working groups is that you bring together people from different disciplines, and you bring them together and they work collaboratively on these problems. Very often, the postdocs at the Synthesis Center are associated with a working group. They may be heavily involved in a lot of the analyses and collaborations going on in the Synthesis Center. Some of the postdocs may not be. Some of the postdocs may be working with several working groups. Some may be working with one working group. Some working groups aren't associated with any center working groups. And the other aspect of these working groups is that they're highly interdisciplinary. That I think it's the natural thing for all of us as scientists, that we generally tend to like to talk to scientists. They have sort of similar backgrounds, and it's actually kind of scary to talk to people who have a different background. But this is one of the things that NCs and other synthesis centers they found, is that because scientists have this tendency to not talk to people from other disciplines, if you can sort of coerce scientists from different disciplines to tackle problems together, that there's a lot of sort of low-hanging fruit out there of really quite insightful and useful problem solving that can be done by these kind of interdisciplinary collaborations. And this, I think these data are from NCs, just showing the biggest collaborations at NCs were between sort of the biological and the mathematical sciences, but then there are other areas of research that have also been tapped in for these interdisciplinary working groups. And sort of the general model that's used at NCs and a lot of these working groups is the idea that these working groups, they may consist of anywhere from 5 to 20 people, and they're from institutions, typically from all over the world. Somebody has to come up with the idea for a initial problem area for the working group to work on, and that person typically identifies the type of the specific people, the participants in the working group they want to bring together. And so once they identify the problem and the people, they develop a general approach to solving the problem. And then the working group comes together at the center, and they basically, through a typically they're there for a week, and they brainstorm and come up with ideas for how to solve these problems. Very often they might identify sort of sub projects they might address. And then typically the working group participants, they go back to their home institutions, they continue to work, they interact via email, video conference, and then they come back together at the center, maybe typically like 6 months later, and they touch base with what they're doing. And depending on the way the working group works, they may typically have maybe just 2 meetings, one where they kind of start it and another where they kind of finish it off. Sometimes there are 3 meetings. And as you get closer to the last meeting, typically, whereas the first meeting is a lot of it is focused sort of on how you're going to approach the problem. The last meeting is usually focusing on sort of finishing it, which is really things like writing papers and finishing analyses and that sort of thing. Um, and one of the things from this concept of ecological synthesis and its implementation in synthesis centers, it's been a really powerful thing. And this is figure just it's a bibliographic analysis that was done from the data on the many papers that came from NCs over like a 20-year period. And a lot of really very highly cited papers came from NC's working groups. And of course, the diagram shows how it's not only that it generated these highly cited papers, but it was responsible for connecting people's from very different disciplines, and has been successful at basically getting people from different scientific research areas to talk to each other and to collaborate together. And then, of course, the other thing that, as a result of NCs and other synthesis centers, is that it's been very successful at developing what we refer to as actionable outcomes. In other words, finding practical solutions to ecological problems. And these are things like marine reserves. There's been a lot of success from synthesis centers identifying strategies that have been implemented in designing marine reserves. And I think this is something, from the problem of biological invasions in forests, there's a lot of potential for using ecological synthesis to solve the many problems that we face. And so that's really what the objective of this new forest invasion synthesis center is to implement the synthesis center concept to solve the many problems that we have with non-native forest insects, diseases, and plants around the world. And as I think that Tomasz mentioned, that this whole thing comes about via funding from the European Union Horizon program through this, it's called the Air Chair program, which funded my position here at the Czech University of Life Sciences, but it's also funding a budget that we're planning to use over the next 5 years to hire postdocs and also to bring people in for working group meetings. So again, the general plan we have for the Synthesis Center here, initially we're hiring 4 postdocs, and this diagram kind of suggests that there's sort of a one-to-one correspondence between the working groups and the postdocs, which it can be, but this whole thing can be sort of somewhat irregular, and there may be some postdocs that are associated with multiple working groups. There may be some working groups that don't have any center postdoc associated with them. There would be myself, Tomasz, Halasmi, who just spoke. We just had a meeting of our external advisory board, who's, as the name would suggest, is giving us advice on how to implement this whole project. And I think yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to point out is that the Czech Academy of Sciences Institute of Botany is a partner in this whole event. That because my background, my background is in forest entomology, and I know a little bit about forest pathogens, but I'm not very knowledgeable about plant invasions. And fortunately, the Institute of Botany, we're really lucky that just on the other side of Prague is the Institute of Botany, which has this incredible knowledge and experience with plant invasions, and so we're collaborating on the synthesis center to, and the Institute of Botany is leading sort of the plant invasion part of the project. Um, and so really the objective of this whole working group, of this whole symposium, as I mentioned before, is to brainstorm ideas for working group topics that we anticipate maybe next month we're going to have a call for proposals for working groups. And so when that call goes out, anybody who wants to can submit a proposal. We hope to make it a very non-bureaucratic, short process to propose forming a working group to collaborate on some aspect of the biological invasion and forest problem. And I just put these up here. I'm not even going to go through them. They're just in our original proposal, we came up with some sort of a type of samples, a type of working group projects that could be proposed, but I anticipate, my hope is that after the 3 days that we're here, that people will go home and have great ideas for working group proposals. And of course, that's the other reason why we're really happy and eager to have more remote participants that are participating now out there now, is to get their input and to inspire them to develop for proposals for working groups as well. So do I have one? Oh yeah, so that's really the whole purpose of the symposium here. And I think this is my last slide, that uh, basically the way we organize the symposium is that into sort of 4 sections. That today, this afternoon, we're kind of taking the focusing on plants, on both the use of non-native plants in forestry, but also talking about plant invasions. And then tomorrow morning will be kind of the insect and disease morning, where we're talking about insects, the problems related to insects and diseases. And then tomorrow afternoon, we're taking more of a tree or forest perspective, looking at impacts on forests. And then finally on Thursday morning, we're going to be looking at more of the sort of socioeconomic aspects of the problem. So, oh, I do have one last slide, which is, I know, and I sort of feel slightly embarrassed that in many ways this is sort of a little bit of a deja vu moment, because I think was it what year was it, 2016? So it was like 6 years ago, I organized what was actually called the IUFRO Task Force on Biological Invasions in Forests. And I think maybe, let's be, maybe 2/3 of the speakers were also speakers in that same conference that we held in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And so if you have sort of a deja vu moment where you hear someone up here speaking and you think, gee, wasn't I sitting here and heard the same person giving the same talk? It's because of that. So, and I have to also say, embarrassed to say that basically most of the speakers are just friends that I invited, and maybe that's maybe unethical, but okay. Anyway, but so anyway, I think that's my last slide, Yurka.